It's a new week. We are getting closer to TCU taking on Deion Sanders and the Colorado Buffaloes. Under 2 weeks away. Team actually wrapping up fall camp, getting ready for game prep. We have Michael Pevia with us from the Purple Rain podcast, and he's going to break down this upcoming season. We'll talk about predictions for the year, guys that we're excited to watch play, all that and more coming up next here on Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right here on Locked On Horned Frogs. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also find us wherever it is you get your podcast in its audio form. Special guest with us today. I'm kind of jealous, Michael, because I love the name of your podcast, the Purple Rain podcast, which recently kind of re-entered podcast streams. A couple of days ago, Michael dropped an episode, and he's going to do that weekly, I think, throughout the season. But I guess first off, before we get started here, let people know like where they can find that and sort of how you stumble across covering TCU.
Yeah, so I'm Michael Pevia. I've been a fan for TCU for a long time, and I already cover an NFL team, and I have a much love for TCU, and I've wanted to cover it for a while, so I just found a local TCU student and said, hey, do we want to do this? You're on campus, you're closer to some people, like, hey, let's go ahead and knock this out. So we've been doing that for football, try to cover in some basketball and baseball there a little bit. We're on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, all that good stuff.
So Michael Pevia joined us today, and we're going to break down the upcoming season, what we're looking forward to about this year. And so we'll kind of give out some superlatives. So as I said in the open there, fall camp is wrapping up. TCU's getting ready now for this game against Colorado coming up here in a few weeks. And Michael, first off, and I left this up to interpretation, so you can go whatever way you want with it. But I want to know the player that you were most excited to watch play this season for TCU football, and you can go whatever direction you want with that.
Okay. So if fans really want to know what I think about TCU football and what I think about football in general, I love defense. Like I absolutely love defense. The past few years haven't necessarily been the best, but especially last year was a big come up. So for this season, I really love this young guy, and that's Paul Oyewale. I'm excited to see him play out of Langham Creek, out in the Houston area. Came in 6'4", was around 240, 250. Now he's had a full year in the Coach Kaz strength and conditioning program. Now he's updated on the TC website at 275, and seems like he will be starting from what things are sounding, and he's been having a good camp. He seems to be quick. His body is transformed. I remember when he came in at first, seeing him at a game, and then seeing him at a local practice that they had. The dude is massive. Like he is redefined. He's big. So I'm excited to see that. He's quick. He's twitchy. And being in that 3-3-5, you're probably going to see a little bit more double teams here and there. Depends. But I'm excited to see this guy.
Yeah, Paul's special, man. And you're right. He looks the part. Like if you were building a prototypical kind of edge rusher in the modern age, he would look very similar to Paul's make and physique. In your mind, like I think this defense, I feel like you're pretty well set at corner. The safeties struggled at times last year, but you got a lot of experience in that back end. Linebacker sort of the same thing. Do you feel like it really comes down to, and you mentioned if they like the 3-3-5, you're not necessarily asking those guys to get to the quarterback all the time. But in your mind, does it really come down to that D-line as sort of kind of the make or break for this TCU defense on how good of a unit they're going to be this year?
Yeah, for sure. And we'll get into that here in a little bit more later in the show. But it's really going to be, I personally believe that that's the make or break for any defense, regardless of what front, what alignment you run. It's gonna make or break it, especially if you can't stop the run. Then get ready to see a lot of defense this year. Maybe not the good kind, but for that, being able to get to the quarterback, because you can only ask corners and safeties to be on an island ever so often. And Joe Gillespie's defense, his corners are on an island a lot of times. So that I would agree with you that, yeah, it's definitely tough, but that defensive line has to come in clutch.
Yeah, I thought about this question for a while this afternoon, and who I ended up on was not probably top of mind when I started thinking about it. But I'm going to go Cordell Russell. And part of me wants to say, Michael, like, okay, freshman wide receiver, we get excited about these guys, but then the games start and how many snaps is he actually going to get? But it feels like, I think Savion's pretty set on the outside, and then you have a lot of depth at that slot position. But I think Cordell's going to get some opportunities, I think even with Dalen Wright coming in like late in fall camp, I'm excited to see what he can do. He seems like he's making plays. I mean, he, again, is a guy that is built really well, like physically. And I don't know. I just get the sense that this coaching staff really likes him. And this is not shade at Jordan Hudson, because I feel like Jordan Hudson's like an easy target right now because he went to SMU. But even more so than him, I just feel like he's really ready to step in immediately and make an impact. But Michael, what do you think about Cordell Russell and his potential this season?
Man, I'm not saying this because I think TCU is just little old TCU, but man, I'm surprised that they were able to hold on to him in the recruiting cycle, because he committed early last year. Of course, when Coach Samples was here and Brian Carrington was here, those were his two main recruiters there. They go on to, Samples goes to the NFL, then Carrington goes to Arizona State. So I'm surprised that they were able to hold on to him, but that's good news for us. Now, the specimen that he is, you look at him and see him in practice, you're like, whoa, like this dude's a freshman. He is a freshman. And he's out there beating guys like Josh Newton, beating guys like Channing Canada, who was the number one JUCO corner in this past cycle. So if he's able to do that, I mean, I'm with you. I'm excited for this guy because he's out there. He looks energized, especially after coming back from an injury that he suffered in the spring. Now he's healthy with no non-contact jersey. So he's out there embracing full contact at the line of scrimmage. The corner's trying to jam him and everything. I'm excited to see it, man. I mean, the last time I was excited about a guy like this was Quentin Johnston, and he graduated from my hometown. And now I'm excited for that. Does Cordell Russell have the chance to be better than Quentin Johnston? I mean, Quentin Johnston was a top 25 pick in the draft. So I think the tools are there. So we'll have to see what he does on the field.
Yeah, the next step, and people let us know in the comments if you're down for this, but we need to start a GoFundMe. Michael, he said it there. He's a Bell County guy. He's also a 254 guy, which means we need to raise cash so he can go visit Micah Hudson and just slip him some money there. The Lake Belton Bronco, who's a 5-star talent. That's legal now with NIL, so we can we can do these things. But yeah, we're both really excited about Cordell. I agree with you. I think he is a special player and somebody who could step in right away and do this at a high level. So offensive MVP, what are you thinking? If things go right, if TCU reaches their ceiling, who is offensive player of the year? Who's your offensive player of the year for this TCU team in your mind?
So this is not probably a fan favorite or probably expert favorite, might I add. There's a lot of new faces, but there's one returning face that, again, from Temple, and I tried to take my bias out of this, and I tried to think about, okay, new system, what kind of system is it? It's a different one that Kendall Browse brings from Garrett Riley. Kendall Browse likes to target the tight end position a lot more than what Garrett Riley's system would do. So I got Jared Wiley here, man, a guy that is 6'7", 260, can run, and is already one of the better blocking tight ends in this upcoming NFL draft cycle. So if he can, build on that chemistry with Chandler Morris, and if he can get the targets, because again, going back and watching some film on D winners and all that NFL stuff for the NFL draft, I noticed that, man, Jared Wiley was open a lot, but with Max Duggan already predetermining where he was going, and of course the first read was always open, especially if you're targeting Quentin Johnston, Jared Wiley was open a lot. But if he's the tight end that can be sort of that safety blanket, I'm hoping for a big year from Jared Wiley, because if he can get going, you're talking about a guy who can block and who can receive. And I think he can receive with some of the best of them. He just needs more reps and opportunities, and I think those will come this season. And if it does, he's going to be up there.
I really like that pick. And there's a lot of different ways you could go because this team is is sort of unproven. But I mean, Jared was good last year, and you're right. I felt like he was underutilized to a certain extent. He's so big. Like I remember even at Texas, he had a few plays. He actually had a big reception against TCU in that COVID game back in 2020 in Austin. But when he had the ball in his hands, you're just like, how are you going to bring this guy down? He moves well at that size, at that frame. I think Jared's definitely a dude that could help himself, certainly from like an NFL draft standpoint this season, if he shows the ability to go up and get the football.
And real quick, just to build on top of that, yes, it was a horrible night on January 9th. It was a horrible night that night against Georgia. But if you go back, Jared Wiley was blocking everybody in front of him, especially on that touchdown where Max Duggan scored. I mean, you go back, he completely turns his defender inside to allow Max that free lane to get into the end zone. Jared Wiley was doing great in that game blocking wise. And that's just another thing of like, okay, so now you're competing, you're blocking against some of the best, probably the best defense in college football. So if he's able to do that again, that helps out the goal line with Chandler Morris if he wants to run, Trey Sanders, Amani Bailey. If you can do all that and more, it just creates more success for the offense, which will lead to more points.
Yeah, I agree with all that. He's very physical, and he was one of the few guys that didn't look just completely overmatched in that ball game. The easy choice here is Chandler Morris. I'm going to save Chandler for later. I'll go with John Paul Richardson, and we'll see what his role exactly is when the season starts. He might end up being more of a security blanket. He doesn't seem like a guy that's going to stretch the defense on a regular basis, but coming off a big year at Oklahoma State, just really reliable, good route runner, seems to have a great feel for how to get open in the defense. I just believe like that's going to be a good connection for this TCU team, and I think he's the most likely guy to lead the team in like receptions at the moment if I had to choose. So I'll go there. And I don't know what you think about the running back position, Michael. I just feel like with those two guys, with Bailey and Sanders, I'm not sure you're going to have like one alpha. I mean, I would love if it ends up being that way, but I think there's a good chance they end up splitting carries a lot just with how they both have kind of split time during practice so far.
Yeah, if you could have a Kendre Miller 2.0, and speaking of Kendre Miller, he had a really good night tonight for the Saints and had a really good showing in the preseason game. If you could have a Kendre Miller 2.0, that would be much more better. But Kendre Miller, I mean, his agility, his balance, when he would get off balance and to be able to stay upright, we saw that so many times. A little bit with the running back position, yeah. I mean, some of that will have to depend on the offensive line. Can they be as good as they were last year on the interior, especially on the interior, man? They were moving everybody last year. So that does depend. But with Sanders and Bailey, I mean, you have a little bit of like thunder and lightning there. Trey Sanders can come downhill when Bailey can come out and receive out of the backfield. He can take one to the house. He can be elusive in open space. So I'm excited for that. I'm intrigued more than excited because, again, like you said earlier, unknown, a little unproven. We don't know exactly what we're getting yet. So that is really that premise on that.
When we come back, we'll talk about the defensive side of the football and Newcomer of the Year and more. That's coming up here on Locked On Horned Frogs. Before we do that, though, I do want to mention LinkedIn. You can go to linkedin.com/lockedoncollege, and you can post your job posting for free. If you're in the business of hiring people, talent acquisition is the name of the game. It's like that in sports. It's like that in business. Don't mess around with this. Use LinkedIn. It's the most popular job board site there is. Everybody knows it. You walk around the street, you ask people, where they're looking for work. They're looking on LinkedIn. You can connect with folks fast. They have screening questions and other simple tools that allow you to narrow down that list so you're not wasting your time. Again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post that job for free today. LinkedIn Jobs, a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. All right, we're here with Michael Pevia from the Purple Rain podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at MichaelTBS_. Again, it's at MichaelTBS_. And we talked about offense, and Michael said earlier when he was talking about, impact players for this team, he's really more of a defensive guy. So who do you think will be the defensive player of the year for TCU football this year?
Okay, so spoiler, this was probably the toughest decision I made out of this entire list that I had to choose from. This was definitely the toughest because you got some really solid names. I mean, possibly Dominic Williams as a nose tackle. He's just a run stuffer. Can he build as a pass rusher up the middle? We'll see this season. But you got guys like Jamoy Hodge, Nnamdi Abiazor, who's moving to the star linebacker spot left by D. Winters. He's moving into that. You got Josh Newton coming back as your top corner, Avery Helm, Mark Perry. And, I mean, Josh Foster is coming in and taking reps from Nuke Bradford at safety, so he's looking to be in the starting lineup. I got to go with Bud Clark on this one, man. Last year he had 5 batted passes, 5 interceptions, and probably the biggest one, in my opinion, was probably not the Fiesta Bowl, shockingly, but the one against Baylor before halftime. They were looking to score, and the ball was a little bit underthrown, but a perfect angle by him came right underneath the receiver and just took the ball from him. That saved the game, and he's a guy that I'm excited for. It's going to be year 2 in this same system, another year in Coach Coz's strength and conditioning program, got a little bit more thicker, a little bit more elusive, working on that agility and flexibility in the hips, especially as a secondary. I'm excited for Bud Clark, man. I really am. As a free safety, he has range, he has physicality. You might look on TV. On TV, it might look like he's like a thin frame, but in person, man, he's muscle. He is lean, and I'm excited for what he can do in this defense. I'm hoping he gets a little bit more than 5 interceptions this year, because the MO might be to attack TCU safeties this upcoming season. But I promise you do not want to attack Bud Clark.
Yeah, good ball skills. I mean, you can't teach that. That's just something that is instinctual, and definitely showed that last year. That's a good choice, and also a good segue. So Stephen Johnson said today, beat writer for 4-Star Telegram, Bud Clark was not at practice this afternoon. Now, they said he took a hard fall there in coverage the other day. No reason yet to sound the alarm bells, but that is just something to monitor as we prepare for Colorado here in a couple of weeks. I like that choice a lot. It's a good question as far as defensive player of the year, because I feel like there's a lot of really good players in this defense. I don't know if there's one clear-cut, just dude of dudes. Hopefully that'll kind of emerge as the season goes on. But you talked about him. I'm going to go Dominic Williams. I was so impressed with what he did as a true freshman. I mean, that's Michael, that's a hard spot to be in. You're 17, 18 years old. You're getting double teamed. You're in the middle. Yes, if he's going to be defensive player of the year, then he's probably getting to the quarterback more, because nose tackle is an underappreciated position from a stats perspective. You're not just going to fill up the stat sheet every week. Mm-hmm. There have been a few of those that can, but those are pretty special players that we're talking about. But I think he is maybe the best at his job going into the season. And so we'll see what happens there. You mentioned this, though. Yeah, so Georgia did this. I think Michigan did this to a certain extent, isolating those safeties in coverage. Do you think that's something that was more like those teams had the personnel to do it, or is it something that you're concerned that everyone could replicate it week to week and try to really exploit, that part of the defense?
So I'm trying to say this in the nicest way possible, because we're all TCU fans here. I don't want to put any players down. But Nuke Bradford was a liability in the secondary for most of the year last year. He had a couple of good plays and everything, but if you go back games like Oklahoma State, Texas, and all those other ones, Bradford was the one that was getting picked on a little bit more. Mark Perry, in my opinion, from the jump from Colorado to TCU, oh wow, this guy really improved. I'm not sure what he did, what he went over in film, what it is that he did, but he improved. Now Bradford looks to not even be starting right now. Now nothing's official, but everything that we've seen and heard, Josh Foster is the one that is taking first team reps consistently for the last 2 weeks, or at least the last 7-8 practices that he's been out there. And Bradford has been healthy, so it's not an injury related reason why Foster is getting first team reps. I hope it's not something I hope it's really not something that teams are going to try and attack, and it turns out that it's going to work. Because again, if Josh Foster can be better than Bradford, Mark Perry stays Mark Perry, Bud Clark takes the jump that I've talked about him possibly making, then yeah, We're going to be strong. Those games, like the last 3 games, man, were nightmares. Were nightmares for the safeties. Kansas State, Michigan, Georgia. It was all over the place. I don't know if you were in Arlington for that day. I was, and I was just pulling my hair out for how many times Bradford and Perry were getting beat. Even Bud Clark on that touchdown pass over the middle to Sennett and Garcia. Like, how in the world did we not see that coming? So as long as they get better, and I got to imagine the tough coach that Joe Gillespie is, he's finding corrections for that. Like, I can't even imagine how many times in spring ball he threw it up in tape in the meetings. Like, hey, pulled up so much film from Michigan, especially Michigan, just working on those details, those angles, those fundamentals, because we all go back to Georgia. Everybody was lost. Everybody, especially the back end, they were lost. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know who was supposed to cover Brock Bowers. They didn't know who was supposed to cover McConkley and all that stuff. It was just, it was crazy. But I don't think if I had to put money on it, I don't think it's going to be a wink link this year.
Yeah, and you wonder too, and it'll be really curious to see how it plays out, because Josh has also struggled at times, like in the snaps that he's had. I like Josh a lot. I hope it works out for him. Him and Darwin were on that same Newton high school team, and they were a lot of fun to watch. But obviously players can take a leap like year to year. You also wonder if one of those younger guys like Chance Biddle or Jamal Johnson come in and just make a case because they have that athleticism maybe to go sideline to sideline more easily. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think the beneficial thing is, you said it, like all these guys are coming back, so they've had an entire offseason now to digest, like, okay, what were they doing? What route combinations were they trying to use against us? How can we sort of plan for this? And so hopefully that'll be like a big part of making that step forward, you know, once the season starts. But it is a concern that's out there. Okay, so newcomer of the year, Michael, is there a player in your mind that's either a freshman or transfer that you're super excited about and have your eyes on?
Yeah, man, I really wanted to put Cordell Russell on this one, but you mentioned him earlier in the season. I got to go with John Paul Richardson for this one. He's a guy who didn't drop anything in spring. Like, you go to the practices, he didn't drop anything. He catches everything. Even at Oklahoma State, had a touchdown against us this past year. It was a tough catch, by the way. He's a guy who he has great ball tracking skills, especially if it's a jump ball. And he's going to be a guy that I think will be that third down security blanket for Chandler Morris. They're going to attack the seams really well. I think he can be a guy that can burn linebackers, get in those advantageous one-on-one matchups with those guys and really take advantage. I'm excited for John Paul Richardson, man. I was excited when we got him, and there were so many names that you can go with, and I know you agree. Like, there's so many names that you can go with: Trey Sanders, Cordell Russell, JoJo Earl, Avery Helm. I mean, there's so many guys you could go with, but I had to go with John Paul Richardson.
No, I like that pick. I think he's gonna be great. I'll go defense here, and I'll go Avery Helm. And as strange as it sounds, I feel like Avery's transfer kind of flew under the radar a little bit. And I don't know why that is, but I think Channing Canada and Mason White are going to be factors too at that corner position. And I know Coach Buckles talked to the media recently, and he talked about how excited he is for those guys, and they kind of fit the profile of these long-rangey corners they like. But I mean, with Avery, you're talking about a dude that was a certified starter in the SEC for a couple of years, and really excelled at Florida, and did a good job. You know, was a shutdown corner, and so I just think he's going to be ready to come in immediately and get it done. And you know, we talked about the safeties earlier. I think there's things to work out there, but Michael, you have to be excited about these corners with Josh and then Avery, and then, you know, you got two guys that the coaching staff's excited about in Canada and White. A lot of good, like, mixing and matching they can do with these corners, and it just feels like that might be one of the bigger strengths of the team this season.
Yeah, when it came to Channing Canada, I actually had a comp for him to Julius Brents, the corner who just graduated from Kansas State and is in Indianapolis now. He's a second round pick. Channing Canada was physical at the JUCO ranks, and again, he was the number one JUCO corner in the league chose TCU over guys like or teams like Alabama, Tennessee, LSU, Washington, Oregon, those programs. And it's almost like surprising because you already had Canada came before Avery Helm because he was a transfer. So Josh Newton was coming back, and you still had some guys on the under the radar like Kyron Chambers and ended up transferring out. So he comes here. Mason White ends up coming here at the number 3 JUCO corner. Channing Canada is the one I got to be excited about. It's almost a little bit more weird that I'm excited about him more than Avery Helm, even though I think Avery Helm is going to kill it this year because you go back to his film at Florida, he is a guy who is not afraid to come up into the box or a blitz and make contact. He's not one of those guys. Like, he reminds me of just a taller, more physical Trey Hodges-Tomlinson. That's what I call him nowadays, because you go back to his Florida tape, teams weren't targeting him at all. They were going for the other side. They were going for the linebackers, getting things underneath. There weren't too many big plays on Helm's side at Florida last year. So I like that pick. I mentioned it earlier, like on the defensive side, he was one of the guys that I was considering. But man, the secondary in general, like you could just tell by how when we talk about defense, man, I'm smiling all the time because these guys in the secondary, I'm excited about. You're deep at safety, at corner, and just talking about safety. Even though Bud Clark hasn't been practicing, what was it today? Chase Biddle, the young up and comer, was starting in his place today. So that's another great sign. Avery Helm, man, I think you knocked that pick out of the park.
And I shouldn't doubt this guy. Like, I don't know why I would, but I know you've been watching it too, Michael. Trey Hodges-Tomlinson's had a really good, like, training camp and has been showing out. You know, one of those games was largely against Quentin Johnston, which was kind of some frog-on-frog crime.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw he had another PBU last night. I had concerns about his size at the next level, but it feels like he's just that physicality and just honestly, like the dog that he is making up for it. I don't know if he can, do it week to week, but it definitely feels like he has a brighter NFL future than maybe I even gave him credit for going into getting picked by the Rams.
Yeah, so interesting note on Hodges-Tomlinson, man. I had a couple of conversations with a couple scouts in the NFL, and one of the annoying things that kind of annoyed them at the same time is Matt Nagy didn't even bother inviting him to the Senior Bowl. I mean, he was the Jim Thorpe Award winner. He was a senior, and he didn't get invited to Mobile, which was ridiculous. Everybody thought it was ridiculous, and he came out and said, well, he wasn't really that tall. The thing that made Hodges-Tomlinson so special, especially when he played at Midway for the Midway Panthers, is it was always his technique. He didn't need the long arms that you probably want in an NFL corner. He didn't need all of that. It was his technique. And like you said, go back to his reps against Quentin Johnston. He's not trying to out-jump Quentin Johnston. He's not trying to, extend arms. He's right underneath him. He's right underneath him in the breadbasket. Quentin Johnston's going up for the catch, and he's just sitting there with his arms up, no pass interference whatsoever. And you saw a little bit of John when Quentin Johnston was on the floor, and that's all good stuff and everything. I can't even imagine how many times they went at it in practice. Sure. But a lot of scouts were impressed with him, and if it was up to them, they would have really wanted to put him on their draft board. But in the NFL, it's a lot of things that are stereotypical. You want your corners to have long arms. They got to be running 4.2, 4.3 40s. They have to do a certain time in the shuttle. So thankfully, it was LA that grabbed him because I was kind of surprised. Personally, I was just surprised from what I've heard that he fell to the 7th round. But at least he's in the NFL. He's going to make a name for himself.
When we come back, we'll talk MVPs and win total for this season. We'll wrap things up next on Locked On Horned Frogs. All right, Michael Pevia, we're talking TCU football expectations for this year. Michael, if you had to pick an MVP or project an MVP for this team, who is it and why are you going that direction?
It's got to be Chandler Morris. It's got to be Chandler Morris. He is obviously going to be the starting quarterback, even though some people would weirdly say he's in a quarterback competition with a third-string quarterback that's not even on campus anymore. But It's got to be Chandler Morris, man. He's gotten much thicker. I think when he played in 2021, he was like around 185, 190. Now he's at around 200, 205 pounds. Got a lot more thicker, getting braced up, getting more muscle mass on that body to take on those hits that he will inevitably take as a starter. So it's got to be Chandler Morris, man. He's gonna drive this team. I'm not entirely sure if you can rely on the run game. Again, this is not me doubting. This is just we don't know yet. We don't know. There's going to be 3 new starters on the interior, potentially 3 new starters, because from what we're hearing, it sounded like Brandon Coleman is going to go inside. Now, is that just because of media? Is that, trying to showboat in front of Colorado, and then they put out their real starting Coker and Coleman back on the outsides? We'll see, but it's got to be Morris. His ability to run, he gets the ball out really, really quick, and man, he throws darts. And he's been exceptionally well. He loves this scheme, probably a little bit more than Garrett Riley's scheme, if we're being honest, because it just allows him to pick apart the seams, and that's where he excels, over the middle, down the field, over the middle, attacking those safeties, getting those matchups on those linebackers, and it's got to be Chandler Morris, his ability to run. And look, it's understandable. People have they pause when they think about him. They have their worries and everything because of injury issues. Look, I would be shocked if any quarterback did not walk away from that Oklahoma State game uninjured, because the man was fighting for his life every single down. And I even rewatched the game recently, and I'm like, and people are worried about that. He was hit almost every play. So then comes in against Colorado, has that freak injury. It happens in sports sometimes. But this year, I think we're all hopeful for him, and I'm excited to see who his favorite target is, because we know who Max Duggan's favorite target was. But who is going to be that guy that as soon as the ball is snapped, he just immediately locks him down? I'm excited to see that part for Chandler.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I have to agree with you. I mean, I think there's a lot of different guys that it could be, but if this team is going to reach the place that we want them to, and we're talking about contending for a Big 12 title, a playoff spot, all those things, then it's in large part because Chandler just played at a high level. And yeah, you have exceptions. Like I'm sorry to my Locked On Bulldog friends. I actually like those guys. Got to know them the week of the national title game. Stetson Bennett is a good quarterback, but he was also, not the biggest part of that team that Georgia has. So there's exceptions like that. But for the most part, if in college football, if you're really good, part of it is elite QB play. And I think Chandler has the ability to do that. He's a different quarterback than Max, but I think they can find ways to use him effectively. And yes, you're right. The injuries, it's a concern, but I mean, I'm not going to spend all season praying that he stays healthy. I hope he does, but I'm just not. What I mean is it's not something I'm just going to keep me up at night. Hopefully he stays healthy. I think, he's in a better position to. And last year was sort of a freak injury. All right, before we go, I feel like I know which way you're going with this. Our friends at FanDuel have the over-under at 7.5 wins for TCU football this year. Michael, which are you going over or under there? And do you find that win total disrespectful? What do you think? Man,
I am grabbing as many sledgehammers as I can from Home Depot, and I am absolutely smashing the heck out of that projection, man. 7.5 is just ridiculous. But look, if TCU wants the respect and the way the new Big 12 is shaping up and how they can recruit and how they can win, then hopefully it doesn't last much longer. But yes, we're smashing the over on that 7.5. There's a nice likelihood that you start out 7-0 before heading into little Manhattan, the Little Apple in Kansas State. So I'm smashing that, man. And I do think that they'll make the Big 12 championship game, because in the Big 12 this year, there are a little bit more question marks. But my Big 12 matchup, I mean, if you wanted me to give early preseason projection, the Big 12 matchup, I have TCU and Texas Tech. That's who I have. I don't understand the hype for Oklahoma. I get some for Texas, but again, Quinn Ewers still has to show something. The defense has to show something. The offense has to show something. Steve Sarkisian has to show something. So I'm just not buying into that yet, but TCU and Texas Tech I have in the Big 12 championship. Smashing the over, I'm thinking around probably 10 wins.
That'd be a fun Big 12 title matchup if it does end up, going that way. Yeah, I'm saying over too. I agree with you. I think, there's the chance they end up with 7 wins in the first 7. A really good chance they end up with 6 or 5. And then, the schedule on the back end is tough, but you should be able to win 2 or 3 games and handle your business and be an 8-win football team. But, hey, I'm glad it's out there because I'm going to put some money on it and ride it all year long. He's Michael Pevia. He is host of Purple Rain Podcast. Again, Michael, let people know where they can find that and when they can check it out.
Yeah, guys. So you can check that out on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can follow us on X, the X app.
That's
I'm
right.
so used to the Bird app, but now it's X. So you can find us on those platforms.
I love it. Check out the Purple Rain Podcast. And this is Locked On Horned Frogs, and we're here Monday through Friday. It's your team every day.